Okay, the argument for mRNA vaccine skepticism, take two. So I'm going to split this into two pieces here. And the first piece is going to be why you should be skeptical of mRNA vaccines, even in a perfect society where you could trust everybody. Where you could trust the news and the president, every company, every public institution, where you can trust all of them to behave well. Why you should still be skeptical about mRNA vaccines. So, December 12th, 2021. Nice sunny day today. Not going to get interrupted by a rainstorm like yesterday. Dusty is fine, by the way. He's inside. He got caught outside for 45 minutes in the rain. But he has good instincts. He was not soaking wet when I found him, so he stayed dry somehow. But anyway, vaccine skepticism. Yeah, I think that everybody should be skeptical about mRNA technology. So I have to be very clear here. I am somebody who fully expects in my own lifetime to receive an mRNA injection at some point. I have not received one yet, but I fully expect that I will in the future. My stance is that this is an amazing technology that will solve thousands of problems, completely unrelated to viruses too. The technology is not designed specifically for vaccines. So that should be the first thing that everybody's aware of, that I think most people are not aware of, is that mRNA technology itself is a broader technology than mRNA vaccines. I made this analogy yesterday and I think it fits. So Bitcoin is to blockchain as mRNA vaccines are to mRNA technology. So, yes, here's why you should be skeptical. And this is stuff I was thinking about right at the beginning of the pandemic. I mean, this is stuff that once they announced mRNA vaccines at all, this is things that I was thinking about. So, this is a very political conversation. Obviously, the things I'm about to say are going to contradict stuff that you've heard from other people, because you've probably heard 1,000 different things from 1,000 different people on this. And I will tell you that my credentials are that I have a degree from UC Davis in bioinformatics, which is the study of genetics using computers. So I studied microbiology, genetics, and computer science for 4 years. That's my background. I worked in a plant biotech lab. I'm not completely ignorant to how this process works. And it turns out that mRNA technology, these mRNA vaccines, are built using something that I'm pretty familiar with. mRNA is really a vital piece of the entire process of converting genes into proteins. And like I said in yesterday's video, the reason that I got into bioinformatics, the reason I got into genetics and all this is because truly at the core of all living things is the process of turning DNA into proteins. It's the same machinery that I have in my body that a tree has in a tree's body. It's the same machinery. It's machinery that we have in common with all living things. So the reason that you should be skeptical about this is because what we are doing here with this technology is we are now manipulating chemical processes, biological processes that we have never manipulated like this before. First of all, this is the first time that we've gone this deep into biology. This is the first time that, if you think about it like a surgeon's scalpel, we are now touching the inner core. We are now reaching so deep into biology that we are in Jurassic Park territory. Truly, we are truly getting closer, at least, to Jurassic Park level technology here. So there's a lot of reasons to be skeptical about this, even given no population studies, given no research, just conceptually. If you're just imagining the process of using mRNA to do what we're doing, right? So I don't know how much detail I need to get into here. I don't know where everybody's coming from. It seems to me that a lot of people have no idea what mRNA even stands for. A lot of people just buy what they hear from the media, from the news. They just buy what they hear from some source, right? People have trusted sources. that they trust. And it seems like everybody has different trusted sources. So I'm going to try to build this from the ground up. And you have to forgive me if I'm repeating things you already know, but I sort of need to make sure everybody's on the same page. I'll go quickly through the bio lesson here. So if your genome is a book, right? If your DNA is a book, mRNA is like a little piece of scrap paper that you take information from DNA and you write it down on a piece of scrap paper. You take that scrap paper to somewhere else where you then build a protein. And so to be clear, every protein comes from your DNA. There's two different definitions of the word protein, and I'm talking about the biological definition here. So genes encode for proteins, and a gene can't turn into a protein until it gets turned into mRNA first. mRNA is the intermediate step. And so this, again, is something that all living things have in common. Every living thing converts DNA into mRNA and then into amino acid chains, and then those fold together into proteins. So that's the steps here. And this technology we have here is synthetically creating mRNA and then injecting it into a human body where it gets picked up by cells, and then it technically hijacks cellular machinery to then build an amino acid chain that gets folded together into a protein that then leaves the cell and then gets picked up by the immune system. And that's where the vaccine step kicks in. But everything before that is not technically a vaccine technology. This technology can be used for other things than vaccines, like I said. So, and it's an amazing technology. I fully expect in my future that I will receive an mRNA injection. I'll receive an injection containing this technology that will solve some problem of mine that's unrelated to viruses. I assume this is going to solve thousands of medical problems in the future once we've fully mastered it. So that's my stance. I'm an mRNA vaccine skeptic, but I'm an mRNA technology skeptic. Like I think that I fully expect to be injected with it, but I also am skeptical because of the circumstances surrounding it. So I'm going to save the circumstances. I'm going to save the politics for the second half of this video. I just want to talk about the technology and just walk through some concepts here and sort of just discuss my thought process and why I'm skeptical and why you should be skeptical too, really, truly. So think about it. Why are we using mRNA? Why do this instead of just injecting a protein directly, or instead of just using a traditional vaccine? So, as we know, traditional vaccines just inject a weakened form of a pathogen into your body, and then your immune system fights it off and learns how to fight off the real thing by fighting off a weakened version. So, in some cases, it's truly as simple as just heating up the pathogen to the point where it becomes weak, and then, let it cool down, inject it into somebody, and then the immune system fights it off. Or you use there's a lot of different ways to weaken a pathogen, I'm sure, or to simulate a pathogen, but the way that we're doing it today with these mRNA vaccines is by using a brand new technology. So instead of injecting the protein, they inject the information. The information is stored inside the mRNA. So obviously, this is something that you can just assume from the way the solution is built. It must be easier to manufacture mRNA than it is to manufacture proteins directly. So you would think, why not just manufacture the protein directly and then inject that into a person? Well, turns out manufacturing proteins, you can just assume this given the solution that they've given us. Manufacturing the protein must be harder than manufacturing the mRNA. So what they do is they manufacture mRNA, they inject that into you, and then your body manufactures the protein for you. So this is new. This is brand new. This has never been injected into a person before the year 2020, as far as I know. There may have been some examples. I assume there were some examples before 2020, but not that I know of, not that I've heard of. So, they have to make billions of copies of this mRNA. When they manufacture it, they can't just inject you with one little strand of mRNA. That's not going to do it. They have to inject you with billions of pieces of mRNA. Billions. because not all of it's going to get picked up by your cells. Some of it's just going to go into you and then just denature, fall apart, and do nothing. Some of it might get picked up by cells and then do nothing. Only some fraction of the mRNA injected into you is going to end up getting converted into a protein, is going to end up getting picked up by the correct machinery and then get converted into a protein. So again, I'm only going to make arguments from just like from armchair reality here, right? Just from the armchair argument position. Stuff that I can just understand conceptually. So, and these are things that should be obvious to everybody who's taken a high school biology class, I would think. As long as you understand transcription, translation, and some basic microbio, you should be able to understand this stuff. So, yeah, your body will pick up some of the mRNA and some of that will get converted into a protein. And so immediately, aren't there questions that you can ask? Aren't there questions you can ask? Like, what happens to the mRNA that doesn't end up in the right spot? I would guess that it just falls apart pretty quickly. There's a reason they put it inside the lipid capsule. It's to protect it, because mRNA is fragile. DNA is fragile. It's a complex little chemical, and it falls apart easily. So that's why they have to make so many copies and put it inside of you. And then you got to wonder which cells are picking it up when it does get inside the cell and when it does hijack the cellular machinery, which is what it's doing. Which cells are picking it up? Is it the cells in your arm? Or does it get into your bloodstream and go elsewhere? Does it get picked up by cells in your heart or your brain or your liver? You know, like which cells are the ones that are picking up this mRNA? And again, there's probably answers to these questions. You can probably go look up. There's probably an intended target where the mRNA is supposed to go. And then there's probably unintended places where the mRNA ends up. So, right away you got to ask, what happens when you hijack cellular machinery? What happens when a cell produces a protein that it normally doesn't produce? This is not just this is not simple what's going on here. See, to me, there's obvious questions here. There's questions like, okay, if the machinery is producing this protein that it's been instructed to produce by synthetic mRNA, right? This is mRNA that's not natural. This is, because your body has plenty of natural mRNA that it's constantly making and constantly converting into proteins. Now suddenly, you get this injection, you have mRNA in your cells that's not natural, it's synthetically produced, and now your machinery picks that up and starts making proteins using that. So there's two questions that I ask immediately here. Two questions that come to mind. And this is just stuff that this is just stuff that seems obvious to me. So it's like, okay, is it a problem that the cell is now producing something rather than something else, right? If these resources are not limitless, you do not have infinite cellular machinery, you don't have infinite time to produce things. So if you're producing this other protein, it means you're not producing the protein it would normally produce. So you're consuming a limited resource to begin with. And that is going to have effects. That will have effects on the cell. There will be unintended consequences. The intention is to produce something that will make you immune to a virus. The unintended consequences will occur. They just will occur. And I don't know who knows the answer to what these consequences are going to be. Surely there are answers to this question. Surely they have studied it. But there will be unintended consequences just from occupying the resources that are there. You have little machines inside your cells. And you think about it like a little factory. Now those machines are being occupied doing something else when they should be doing what they naturally do. That's going to cause problems, unintended consequences. And then there's another question is, this mRNA manufacturing process is likely imperfect. It's not perfect. It's likely that there will be errors in the mRNA sequences. During the manufacturing process, it's not going to be perfect. I have a hard time believing they've perfected it. Even after hundreds of millions of years of evolution, it's still not, biology hasn't perfected it, so I doubt the scientists have. So when they inject this into you, it's possible that you're producing proteins that were unintended. And a lot of those are just going to fall apart immediately or be useless. A lot of it will just be like a deleterious mutation in the mRNA, kind of, and it'll just produce nothing. But it's possible that you'll produce some kind of protein that isn't the one you intended, and it has some shape that's just unexpected for your body. It's possible that you'll just produce something. I mean, we're injecting technically it's synthetic information, right? mRNA just contains information. DNA contains information, mRNA contains information. And so if the information isn't written down properly, when your machinery goes to build it, it might build something that is not what the scientists intended, and it might be something that your body has never seen before. So that could have unintended consequences. And we don't, I mean, again, there's probably answers to this, but how often is there a error in the process of writing this down into the mRNA? These manufacturing processes, not only do they have to make billions just for one person, but they have to make billions for millions of people. So they have to make trillions and trillions of copies of this mRNA. And I have some doubts that they get that perfect every time. It seems impossible that they would. So there's questions about that, about the information being written down and then the information being transferred into a protein or translated into a protein. So, and this is without doing any research. This is just what I was thinking at the beginning of the pandemic when they even announced the word mRNA vaccines. I was like, okay, we are now in a whole new realm here. This is new medicine. These are the unintended consequences of it. And this is, again, given perfect behavior, given a perfect society where you could trust the manufacturers, they're still going to have these problems. Even if they all know what they're doing, even if they're all experts and they're all trustworthy, they're still going to have at least these two unintended consequences here. And then when you get into what happens after the protein is produced. So the idea is that it's producing a protein that exists in the body of the virus, right? So what they did is they sequenced the genome of the virus. A virus generally is made of a small number of proteins, or a small number of kinds of proteins. So a virus's genome, or the little virome, will encode for some small number of proteins, right? Relatively small number. It's a relatively simple organism compared to other organisms. There's always the argument whether they're alive or not. But so what they did is they sequenced the genome of the virus. They find a protein in the virus. They call it the spike protein because it's on the surface of the virus. I think that's why they call it that. Or it's the piece that attaches to the cell. It's the piece that it uses to mount onto a cell, I think. I might be wrong about that, but this mRNA codes for that particular protein in the virus. So you get this injection. Billions of copies of this go into your body. Some of those copies get picked up by cells, and then those cells convert those copies of mRNA into this protein. And so again, what are some of the consequences of this? So the intention is that it produces this protein, which then escapes the cell, gets into the bloodstream where it encounters the immune system, and then the immune system learns how to fight the real virus by just encountering this one protein, right? It's a genius solution because theoretically, if there are no unintended consequences, it should be a perfectly safe way to encounter a pathogen or to encounter a piece of a pathogen, right? There's no way that this spike protein could possibly be as dangerous as the virus itself, right? Right? That's the intention. The intention is to get some level of this protein into your bloodstream so that your bloodstream or so that your immune system can encounter it. So we know what the intention is, and the intention must be some quantity of this protein available to you, right? It's got to be more than one. It can't just be one single protein, because again, proteins are usually not, I don't know about this particular one, but they don't last forever, right? They fall apart just through natural processes. They just denature, I think is what you would call it. And so you need to have probably, I don't know the number, but it's probably millions. You probably need millions and millions, maybe billions of these proteins to be constructed in order for your immune system to actually recognize it. It needs to be above a certain threshold. So what happens, what are the unintended consequences of this? So one of them might be, maybe you don't hit that threshold. Maybe you get the injection and it's not enough of the protein is produced for your body to be able to, for your immune system to be able to learn from it, right? So there's probably some minimum threshold, but there's probably also a maximum threshold, right? There's probably some number you don't want to go over. You don't want to just inundate your bloodstream with this protein, right? If there was too much of it, that would cause a problem. There must be a theoretical maximum as well as a theoretical minimum. So there is a target range, right? A target range. And I don't know what the theoretical minimum or maximum is. I don't know how consistently they hit within that range. Again, I'm assuming that everybody knows what they're doing and everybody's trustworthy and that they can pretty consistently hit that target range. Going to assume that. But we're still talking about a protein getting released into your bloodstream. And there may be unintended consequences of this, and I have seen some real life examples of possible consequences of having this protein in your bloodstream. Again, this is a protein that's at least complex enough that they can't manufacture it, or at least complex enough that it's more difficult to manufacture that than it is to manufacture mRNA. So they just, this is stuff that, again, no research. This is just like, you can get here just by thinking about it. It seems to me that there could be some potential unintended consequences of having this protein in your bloodstream. And maybe that's, it is a protein that's going to be in the virus anyway, so it's like, would you rather just have the protein or the virus? You could probably just want the protein itself, but these are just things you have to think about. The main thing I'm concerned with is this hijacking of the cellular machinery. Even after you get the shot, even after all the chemicals that were in the shot itself kind of have dissipated or fallen apart, right? Even after the chemicals in the shot are consumed, and I'm talking about the lipid capsules and talking about the mRNA, even after those things are gone, there's going to be consequences that continue on down the line. And we just don't know what the long-term consequences of this are. And we can sit here and think about it. What happens to a cell after it has its machinery hijacked for a little bit? Probably just goes back to normal afterwards. Probably just, continues on with its daily life. But I imagine there's going to be some cases of cells that are just destroyed by this. There's going to be cases of cells that pick up way too much of this mRNA, and then they just become, the machinery is going to get sort of clogged up, and the cell might malfunction. And you got trillions of cells, you got backup cells. Cells die all the time. But what I'm saying here is that there's going to be unintended consequences. And mainly the thing that concerns me is not the fact that we're doing one injection or two injections. What really concerns me is the fact that we're going to do regular injections and that people are lining up for this. That's what's really concerning. It's that people seem to be planning to receive an injection every year for the rest of their lives. Maybe we know what the consequences are of one or two shots, but we definitely don't know what the consequences are of regular injections of this technology. And so if you're not skeptical of regular injections, then I think you're crazy. You should be skeptical about regular injections of mRNA technology because nobody knows what the long-term consequences are. We just don't know what it looks like 10 years down the road. And so if you're weighing your risks, again, you're weighing your odds here. Should you take one of these injections or should you encounter the virus? And again, this is assuming you can trust everybody. This is assuming you can trust everybody involved. Is it more dangerous to encounter the virus, which your body has encountered viruses before? Or is it more dangerous to receive an annual injection of mRNA technology for 10 years when nobody knows what the long-term consequences of this are? Nobody knows what the unintended consequences may be. And as we know with science, as we've always known, especially with biology, but with science in general, our intentions and what actually happens are often two different things. And what we're doing right now is we're messing around with machinery that is beyond our comprehension. No person on this planet, no matter how experienced they are or how credentialed or what level of expertise they have, can tell you what all the consequences of this are going to be. Nobody knows. So I think it's irresponsible that we're injecting this into people so much right now. That we're injecting this into hundreds of millions of people right now is irresponsible. We should be doing small-scale studies over a long period of time before we inject this into the whole human race. And we definitely should not be injecting this into children. Definitely if we're going to do regular injections, right? We should not be planning on giving a 10-year-old an injection of this, and then when they turn 11, another one, and when they turn 12, another one. This is not something you should inject into a developing human body until you fully understand the consequences of what you're doing. And truly, we do not. There are gaps in knowledge that are so large about this stuff. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. Like, even the people that are the deepest on this subject do not know. There's gaps in human knowledge about the machinery which we are currently manipulating. And it's an amazing fact that we can do this at all, but it's also it's hubristic to the extreme that we just assume that we've mastered this right away somehow. You know, like I said, I don't think this was ever injected into a person before 2020. And now we're just like, okay, time to inject it into hundreds of millions of people every year for the rest of time. You know, like what's the plan here? And why, now I got to get to the politics of it, but like, why is there this expectation? Why is there so much social pressure to receive an experimental injection? I mean, it's truly an experiment. We truly do not know what happens to a person 10 years down the road after getting one of these injections, especially on a regular basis. That's what's scary to me. When I was thinking about my own chances here in the beginning, I was thinking, okay, do I just go up against the virus, or do I go up against which one has a chance of injuring me, right? If you're thinking about injury, severe injury from the virus or the vaccine, you're not just thinking about one vaccine, you're thinking about regular injections for a decade. So a decade from now, do I want to look back and be like, okay, I got 10 shots of this experimental tech, or do I want to just say, okay, I encountered the virus and survived it easily because I'm in the age group that survives it easily, right? My body is perfectly adept at encountering viruses and battling them. My body is not ready for receiving mRNA injections like this. You know, there's no precedent for this. There's no evolutionary precedent. There's no scientific precedent. We are doing something brand new on a massive scale. And again, even if we could trust all of the companies to behave properly, even if we could trust the public-private relationship to behave properly, this is still something you should be skeptical about. And so given that I've made that point extremely clear, given that I've just explained things that nobody could possibly argue with, you know, then I got to get into the whole subject of, okay, can we trust everybody? So now part 2, and this is truly the stuff people have been arguing about to no end for the past year and a half. Can we trust Pfizer? Can we trust Moderna? Can we trust the rollout, the implementation of these vaccines? Can we trust the data that comes out about them? You know, can we trust all these people involved? Can we trust the politicians and then the mandates? Like, clearly there's political power to be gained here. Clearly there's money to be made. Whenever there's money and power at stake, you have to wonder what the incentives are. You have to wonder why people are behaving the way they're behaving. I mean, and isn't it interesting that Pfizer and Moderna have made billions of dollars in the past year and a half? Isn't it interesting that they've made so much money? Do you think they made money because they're saving human lives, or do you think they made money because they're selling a product? So, you know, and then the narrative again around this, right? If I put a title on this video that says Vaccine Skeptic, some people are just going to read that title and just assume I'm a moron. They're just going to assume I'm some sort of ignorant, evil, selfish person. What they're going to do is they're going to think of the narrative that's been injected into their brain by private interests. There's this narrative where it's like, you know, I did this in another video, but it's like, think about all of the classic 1950s advertising, the sort of Mad Men advertising about cigarettes and about cars and all this stuff, where they say, to be a proper American, to be a real man, you must buy this. To be a proper American, buy this. Every good American housewife buys this product, you know? And it's like, we are seeing exactly the same bullshit today. Precisely the same bullshit. Which is like, oh, every good member of a community, if you want to protect your grandmother, if you want to protect the weak, if you want to, only a selfish asshole would not get this vaccine. Like, that's clearly a narrative generated by private interests. And, you know, am I a conspiracy theorist for thinking that this is what's happening here? The only reason people look down on the unvaccinated is because of narrative reasons, right? It's reasons that are just put on them. This is a narrative that's propagated by private interests. That's what it is. There is no moral superiority that comes from receiving this injection. There is not. This is an experimental technology that they are attempting to coerce everybody into taking. It's experimental and it's dangerous. It's dangerous. And sure, there might not be side effects now. Everybody that's getting these injections now, maybe you got one or two and you're fine. Maybe you'll be fine forever. Maybe there are no long-term consequences. But to receive this on a regular basis is, I believe it is bordering on psychological insanity. I mean, it's bordering on, like I said, Jurassic Park stuff. Like, this is truly, we're playing around with God-level technology at this point. We are truly manipulating machinery that has existed for 2 billion years, longer than that. This is not a normal, this is not taking a vitamin. This is not taking a normal vaccine. This is a whole new realm of medicine that has not been studied on a long-term basis. It just has not. This is quite new. It's brand new. And yes, there is a pandemic, and I understand what the storyline is. The story is we need to stop the spread. We need to, get the injection so you can be immune, to save your community, to save yourself. That's a story. If you believe that, you've been tricked by private interests. That's what I think. You've been tricked by private interests, or you're just falling into some political narrative that's just propagated by, think about how politicized this is. Why is it that there's a correlation between whether you're vaccinated and who you voted for? Why is that a thing? That should be completely, the party you voted for and your likelihood of taking a vaccine should be completely independent concepts. And yet they are not. It has become politicized. It's like a way of marking your team. If you're vaccinated, you must have voted for Biden. If you're unvaccinated, you must have voted for Trump. So our behavior around this is already irrational. So when somebody says they're a vaccine skeptic, you're basically being like, hey, I'm on the red team. And this is irrational. This is wild. We're being caught up in stories. We're being caught up in narratives. And there are private interests that are pulling the levers on this. And there's politicians gaining power from this. Political systems clearly have things to gain from this. They did these lockdowns. They did these mask mandates, these vaccine mandates. These are not innocent behaviors here. These are not behaviors that you can simply trust. These are behaviors of a government entity that is flexing its muscles. It's acquiring power. And power given is not so easily taken away. And this is, again, the narrative is, well, we got to save, one life is too much. We can't even lose one life. And these lockdowns have caused a spike in depression, a spike in suicide rates, loss of jobs for everybody. Like, small businesses are being destroyed. Like, there's so many things that are going wrong with these lockdowns and these mandates. And this is impossible to talk about without going full conspiracy mode. But truly, our response to this virus is almost like, if you think about what makes a terrorist powerful, if you look up the definition of terrorism, truly, what a terrorist is, what a terrorist does, is inflict damage in some way so that the response from the thing that you inflicted damage to actually causes more damage to itself than you ever could have done. So a terrorist will apply a small amount of force and then get the thing to react and then hurt itself even more, right? That's what we have done with COVID. COVID applied a small amount of damage, and our response to it is so wild that we've done more damage to ourselves than COVID ever could have done. So COVID is like the ultimate terrorist. It ruined my life in Los Angeles, and I'm not the only one whose life that it ruined. Everybody's life was changed, at least, by this. So, I don't want to complain. Everybody can complain about it. But, and this mRNA vaccine is just part of our irrational response. We're like a wild animal flailing around at this like slight flick of a virus, the virus that technically isn't that dangerous, really, to most people. And yet we're flailing around and injecting ourselves with this experimental technology that's going to have consequences. I cannot imagine a world where 10 years down the line, after 10 injections of this stuff, there aren't going to be people with some very strange side effects. We're messing around with stuff we don't understand, and there's going to be consequences for this. There will be. There are going to be long-term effects. There's no way that this will not have side effects on the long term given regular injections. It's just not possible. It's not possible. it makes no sense to me to even imagine it that way. But, you know, I'm just a guy who just studied this for 4 years. I'm just a guy who got a degree in this field. I'm just a guy who passed all the tests. I went to all the lectures and did all the tests and got the degree. I got the piece of paper that tells me that I at least understand the concepts well enough to get the piece of paper. And I said this in another video, your credentials don't give you the ability to distinguish truth from non-truth. And part of the issue with what's going on here is we're having trouble distinguishing truth from non-truth. We don't know who to trust. There are clearly people talking about alternative medicines, like ivermectin, for example, and they're being called liars. They're being called liars, even though they're doing exactly the same type. Like they are scientists as well. You know, they have the same credentials, but they're a bunch of liars who are spreading horse paste rumors and things. You know, like that's what they're treated as. Anybody who talks about ivermectin is like a conspiracy theorist immediately. When in reality, if you follow the science, like these people constantly talk about, follow the science, then you'll find that there truly are alternatives to this vaccine. There truly are real, viable alternatives to the mRNA vaccine. It may have been wise to have just waited on the vaccine. We may have been unwise to just inject this into hundreds of millions of people. It may have been smarter, it may have been more wise to do something else. Hold off on the vaccine. You know, maybe let's look for alternatives. And again, conspiracy theory land here, but guess who can make money off ivermectin? Nobody. Nobody can make money off of that. It's off its patent. You know, it's very easy to make. You don't make money from selling it. So guess what? We're going to have a narrative that's propagated by private interests who are trying to make money, who have already made money. They're going to propagate narratives that are going to discredit and suppress alternative solutions. It's clear. They do this all the time. There's a repeated pattern over 100 years. And somehow right now, people believe, they really believe that it's not happening right now for some reason. They really believe that the vaccine is the way to go and anybody who doesn't think so is crazy. Like, how can you possibly believe that? How can anybody... Well, I know how they can believe it. They've been duped by private interests. That's what it is. So I guess that's probably about it. I don't know if there's anything else I wanted to say. You should be skeptical about this vaccine, even given a perfect society. And then given the fact that we don't live in a perfect society, given the fact that we live in a world filled with corruption, and, you know, everybody knows that the healthcare system is fucked up. Everybody knows that the relationship between the public and private healthcare sectors is fucked up. We know that the government can't be trusted. We know that private companies can't be trusted. We know that when they're working together, there's shady things going on. And yet we're like, yeah, give us this experimental technology. I can't wait to get that injection. Yeah, people are like lining up for it. It's wild. There's going to be documentaries about this in the future. I mean, it's unbelievable to me that there aren't going to be long-term effects of this. It's unbelievable. Given regular injections especially. So. Okay. Bye.